Be honest, when were you the dating horror story? Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. I had recently broken up with a guy who I was convinced was my true love. An acquaintance asked me out to dinner and I reluctantly accepted, although I wasn't interested. This poor guy picked me up and was so nice and kind as I spent the entire evening talking about my ex and how much I loved and missed him. I couldn't stop. He dropped me off at home and gently said he hoped I found happiness. I looked him up a few years ago and he's happily married with 3 kiddos, so I don't think I broke his heart. I went to a house party at New Year's with a cute girl I just met, and right after the ball dropped we started making out pretty hard. After about 15 minutes I started to feel fairly sour, so we decided to head back to her place. Turns out I had come down with a full-blown stomach flu, which ended up being intensified by the heavy drinking from the earlier festivities. I had to try to convince this girl I didn't know that this wasn't from the booze and that something bad was happening to me. I was so sick the next day that I couldn't leave her place, as venturing farther than 20 feet from a toilet was not going to happen. My fever was so high that I was hallucinating and got lost on my way to the toilet in a straight hallway, then proceeded to faint in her arms when she found me confused staring at a wall. I shit and puked in her house for a full 24 hours before I could muster up the energy and courage to take the 15 minutes voyage home to my sanctuary of safety and acceptance. Oh, and she lived at her mom's house. So that's the story of how I first met my mother-in-law. She's a very understanding woman. Haha. Background: I was born without a sense of smell. One day, I finally got up the nerve to ask this girl at work out to lunch. It was a hot day. I walked her out to my car, opened and closed the door for her and started around to the driver's side when she jumped out of the car and ran inside without saying a word. I couldn't find out what happened. She refused to talk to me. So days later I asked one of the other girls and finally they said, "Something in your car smells bad." I looked around and found the half carton of unfinished lunch milk that had spilled on the floor in the back seat a few days prior. Story of my senseless life. I was on a first and only date with a dude. I was nervous, so I overshared some crazy shit about my family's history. Then, during dinner I could not stop spitting fucking food everywhere. It was truly a one-off thing, because I haven't done it since. Like, I was overly cautious and somehow, during dinner, it kept happening. Humiliating. He unmatched me immediately, which I completely understood. Legit one of the worst dates I've ever been on, and I can only blame myself. The good news is, I met my husband a month later. I told him about that date, and he thought it was hilarious. Went on a first date. Went with a beautiful girl and asked to put everything on my tab. Stepped out for a smoke. This girl, who was almost 300 pounds, came up to me, obviously drunk, and grabbed me by my shirt. She then ripped open my shirt, and as all the buttons were flying off, planted a kiss on me. As I pulled away, I saw my date through the window, and her jaw dropped. She refused to listen to me about not knowing this girl. And when I went to leave, they told me my tab was almost $250. My first date got mad, then drunk on my tab, then left. Never seen her again and had to call my family for money to pay the tab. Worst first date ever. I did not realize that a friend in college thought she was dating me for months. We'd hang out, occasionally grab coffee or go to concerts, loaf at each other's apartments, share food, pretty standard goodbye hugs, the occasional nap on the other person. Nothing romantic, never even talked about it as if we were dating, no formal acknowledgement. Then one day she saw an open box of condoms in my room and got really upset and ghosted me for a week. After that it occurred to me that she may have had different intentions when she invited me over when her parents weren't home in high school. In college she had literally invited me to her apartment to cook dinner and asked me to get in bed with her. Maybe she wasn't taking her pants off in front of me on a regular basis because she found the sensation annoying. But I never knew. I was just having a good time walking with her and her dogs, or sucking down a chai tea latte, or listening to music. I agreed to a date way too soon after a fairly sudden and traumatic breakup. I'm not sure if I even realized it was intended to be a date at the time, but looking back it definitely was. I didn't have much else on my mind or going on in my life at the time, so the entire 2-hour car ride to a nice restaurant in the nearest city and back was either talking about my ex, crying, or complete silence. I'm not in contact with him anymore. Turns out it never would have worked out due to massive political differences. But I still feel bad because I can only imagine how pathetic and obnoxious I must have been. For pretty much my entire 20s. I was a creep, and even scared one girl away from the local blues dancing scene. Not on purpose, I just had a profound lack of self-awareness when assessing my own actions. I couldn't recognize what was creepy and what crossed the line. Here's the thing. In my late teens, I had gone through a horrible, terrible, traumatic event that tore my family apart. Combine that with some moderately severe, and untreated mental illness, I hit 2 or 3 check boxes for the Colorado Disability Checklist, but I'm still moderately functional, and a potential spectrum diagnosis, I was struggling with a lot. Unfortunately, this left me with a huge victim complex. In my own mind, my actions were beyond reproach. After all, I was the victim in my life's tragedy, why should I even bother looking at my own actions? It took a lot of self-reflection before I realized I was a creep. Until I was over 30. For a long time I was angry at the world because of my loneliness. I didn't realize I was the one hurting people, and driving women away from me. I was too smart to fall for the incel shit, but I thought I was the victim when it came to dating, not the horror story. I'm currently in therapy, taking meds, holding down a steady job. But I'm staying far away from the dating world for the foreseeable future. I have a long way to go before I'm even ready for a simple dinner date, let alone anything beyond that. Sorry. I started writing, and, well, I guess I needed to get this off my chest. I dated via phone a girl. We got along well enough that we decided to meet at a mall for her first in person. She brought a friend with her just in case, which I totally understand, meeting someone in person for the first time. One thing I remember, she said she liked country music. BTW, this was circa 1995. I was cool with that, not my favorite, but it's alright, and an ex was really into it, so I figured I knew a lot about country to hold a conversation about it. We meet and I noticed her friend's striking red hair, which reminded me of country singer Reba McEntire. So I decide to show off my country music knowledge and say, "Oh, you look just like Rita McNeil." Pictures linked for reference, the two look nothing alike. And to make matters worse, my date was a plus-sized brunette, but not nearly as plus-sized as Rita McNeil. That probably didn't endear me to her, as I remember the date not going well and her not returning my calls after, and I'm still embarrassed about it 25 years later, and I'm sure she's still probably telling stories about the guy who compared her to Rita McNeil. To my once date, if you're reading this, I've been deeply embarrassed about it for a quarter of a century. Just getting similar names mixed up. Pasting this from the last time I told this story. While it was traumatic for me, poor Colin has walked away with a serious horror story. Oh man, okay, buckle in for one of the most confusing moments of my life. It's been about 13 years and a lot of it happened drunk, so hopefully my storytelling doesn't go too awry. The prologue, as pasted from the last time I described this night. Greater than singing in a bar, notice a regular watching me in the crowd. He was not an outwardly friendly guy, rather curt and sometimes rude, so I avoided him. But this one night I realized there was a pull between us. When I got off stage, he walked up to me and said something about how sexy I looked and how he'd been trying to avoid me for so long but he couldn't take it anymore. We closed out the bar that night, an intense connection brewing between us in that back booth. There was innuendo, but moreover there was a passionate pull between us as we talked about life, mistakes, worries. I was too drunk as we left in the taxi and he took me home in it instead, refusing to take advantage of me. We kissed for the first and only time in the back of that cab, the passionate kind where it feels like all the colors of the world click into place. He left me on my doorstep with a kiss on the forehead, thanking me for the conversation of his life. And on to our story. A few weeks pass and I haven't seen him, which is unusual because we both went to karaoke twice a week for the near year leading up to that. I come home feeling particularly jilted and dramatic night and pull up missed connections on Craigslist to see if anyone mentioned me, as I did for time to time. No avail. By then I was fully sauced, swept up in the comments about yearning, and got it in my head that I should pour out my feelings about that night into my own missed connection post. I wrote prose about it. I described his hands and how safe I felt with him, how kind he was to not only respect my boundaries but be content within them. How electric I felt, trapped under his eyes in the spotlight. How the conversation made me feel at once like a woman and like a child meeting her best friend. Your girl went all out, down to listing his first name, drinking herself to sleep after pressing send. Soon after, in my inbox there was a reply. It was him. He wrote about the bar, our friends there, described himself physically. Undeniably him. He wrote that he also felt the connection. He asked me to continue the conversation, asked me about my family, my childhood, my dreams. We continued correspondence for a week or two. It was only just decent, if I'm honest. It lacked the spark, sometimes it was uncomfortable. Every once in a while he'd turn the conversation like weirdly sexual out of nowhere, and each time I'd say something like, "I'm not interested in talking about that, we're talking about my mother right now." Once he sent me what looked like a nude from the thumbnail of the email attachment with a bunch of smile emojis. I replied I wasn't interested in seeing someone's body outside of the bedroom and we weren't at that place yet. I was uncomfortable but second-guessing myself, constantly reminding myself of that night. Maybe I was reading it wrong. He was indeed at least 10, maybe even 20 years older than me. Maybe this is how men talked. I'd show up at the bar, wait for him, leave sadly, then rush home for my next email. One night I go to the bar and there he is. I run to him, a movie moment. When he turned and saw me, his face turned to instant rage. It all happened so fast, but he picked me up and threw me away from him. I hit people in the wall. He was screaming to get away from him. He was calling me crazy. My ears felt like they were ringing. I was so confused and panicked. I think I had a panic attack, and my next memories are being in the bathroom crying hysterically, calling my best friend, afraid to leave the bathroom, so confused, so hurt and feeling betrayed, absolutely terrified. All the while a drunker-than-hell woman is wiping my face, slurring repeatedly, "Don't cry, you're beautiful, lol." When I finally left the bathroom he came at me again. I guess he didn't know I was still there. It was a blur. I remember he called me crazy again and I threw a drink in his face, and then the bouncer was pulling him out of the bar. But the thing that stuck with me was how terrified he looked. The next 2 times I went to the bar after a week of hiding out, all my friends there turned a cold shoulder to me. People left tables I was sitting at. No one was buying me a drink when I got off the stage, the way we always did for each other. Eventually one of them matter-of-factly told me that they heard what I was doing to his family and I needed to get help. Record scratch. What? I kept saying he and I were talking from a Craigslist post I made. She kept saying he didn't use the internet and I was unhinged. It took almost an hour to get this woman to say more than a sentence to me, and to this day I don't think she believed me. But what it came down to was that everyone heard I had tracked down his ex-wife and their children and threatened them for weeks. Unspeakable things I'd do to her children if she got in the way, how the only babies he should have were with me. He didn't believe it at first, but his ex had photos of me to prove it was me. She knew all about my life. She knew what songs I sang, she knew all about that night we spent together. She'd been the one I was speaking to on Craigslist. I tried to explain this to the woman in the bar, but she looked at me with so much pity and disgust and just walked away. I'm angry right now even typing this, lol. I don't remember leaving the bar, but I never went back. I went home and sent one final email basically saying that she was a monster. That she tried to be sexual with me to trap me into situations, and I just kept talking about my life and family because I was a nice girl. I wasn't a threat. I didn't do anything wrong, and she preyed on me out of her own jealousy. She was sick, she was a monster. It was incoherent. I was so gutted by her cruelty. I was so gutted by being made out to be this monster and having people believe it. I was so gutted that he and I would never get to have another night like that one. A year or so later he came into my work. I had to make him a sandwich. He acted really uncomfortable but tried to be polite. My ego made me blurt out something as unsmooth and direct as, "Just so you know, I never did any of that. Your ex found my missed connection post on Craigslist. She was talking to me, mining me for information. So you attacked me out of nowhere to me. I know you were scared of me, but I never threatened her children. I liked you a lot. She is not a good person." He took the sandwich and left. I had no idea what to make of his expression, but to me it looked like he thought I was legit crazy. So that was the time I was creepy to the point of terrifying.
Thanks for watching. If you like these videos, hit subscribe, smack the bell, and smash the like. I'm the Reddit Onion. See you next time.